Welcome back to the YouTube home for BamaOnLine.com. Travis Reier, senior analyst for BOL, alongside senior team writer Charlie Potter right there. Bright and early, bushy-tailed. Good night of rest for Charlie Potter on this Thursday morning. Of course, down there in the prestigious Center Solo Square, we have team expert Jimmy Stein. Guys, we're going to get into a lot of topics here on the show, team related topics, as we typically do on these Thursday shows. We're going to talk some Alabama baseball, some Alabama softball, primarily with Jimmy. Then we're going to get into some DeBoer and Nate Oates, Kalen DeBoer, Nate Oates takeaways, because the ever busy in May, Charlie Potter, spent a good bit of time over in the Birmingham area here in the last 48 hours or so. We'll get the biggest takeaways for both those coaches from you guys as well. And then we'll get into some topics like wide receiver over-unders for the 2024 season. And we'll also give our thoughts on the top 3 head coaches for the Crimson Tide's football schedule in 2024. So again, plenty to get into. And what we'll start with first, though, Jimmy, with you, is bubble watch for the Alabama baseball team. We talked about this earlier in the week going into the SEC tournament in Hoover. Tuesday matchup with South Carolina doesn't go Alabama's way. You had, 5, 13, and 17 teams going into the tournament. And you've had a couple of 3 of those teams, Jimmy, make a little bit of a run now. You know, when you talk about USC and Vanderbilt, LSU, I think those teams are all 2-0 after 2 games there in the SEC tournament. Your thoughts now as we sit and wait for this Alabama team following its first round exit from the SEC tournament?
I think Alabama was in going into Hoover, in as a 3 seed, and I was, pretty confident about that. I'm still pretty confident, but what can happen is, like you said, Travis, there could be a couple of SEC teams that weren't in, make a run to maybe the finals in Hoover. Then you have, I believe, Indiana State, who was just a lock to make the tournament. They lost in their conference tournament. So now a team from their league it's going to be a 2-bid league. That's going to knock somebody further down. So the way the results could run between now and Sunday could really affect Alabama's standing. Again, I think they were in. I still believe they will be in. But each time there's a result that doesn't go chalk below where Alabama sits, it can be a bit nerve-wracking. It's just funny to me that, baseball and softball this year at Alabama, complete opposites. Baseball, they can really hit it. Pitching is very questionable. Softball struggles to hit it. The pitching's great. But, I think the result of injuries really with baseball, losing Riley Quick that opening weekend was a blow they never really recovered from.
Yeah, it started early for Rob Vaughn's team in terms of that pitching depth, especially when you're looking at frontline depth for that staff. And started off well enough in the game against South Carolina, right? But then the Gamecocks put on kind of a fireworks show at the plate of their own over the remainder of that contest. So now it is very much a sit and wait situation for Alabama baseball. I'm with you. I would feel still very comfortable with this team being in postseason play if I hadn't seen a couple of 3 other teams now not just pick up wins in the SEC tournament, but position themselves nicely. Now, as you get deeper into the tournament, these teams obviously have a greater likelihood of playing each other and maybe ending each other's runs. But I guess my question would be more of your comfort level. You sound pretty comfortable still, even after Hoover, and I would join you in that. How comfortable are you, Jimmy, with this softball super regional that's cranking up in Knoxville, Tennessee tomorrow? The Alabama Crimson Tide, winners of the Tuscaloosa Regional, one more time under Patrick Murphy. Now a all SEC super when you look at the Crimson Tide and the Vols. We talked about it earlier in the week. I think for me, is it real? Is the offensive display that we saw to cap that Tuscaloosa Regional, is there some carryover? Is it sustainable? I think you feel good about the pitching. I mean, you're going into this situation, with a legit number one and even an emerging future number one, you would think perhaps in Brisky to go along with Caleb Beaver. But can you envision this offensive performance that we saw at times and at the end of that Tuscaloosa regional carrying over against some really good pitching from the Tennessee Vols?
Yeah, I think if Alabama's offensive resurgence is continuing, we might not know this weekend, because I'm a subscriber to, and I bet you guys are also, that good pitching beats good hitting. I believe that's true in baseball. I believe it's true in softball. I think those Tennessee pitchers are just really good. And, what will be a little frustrating is when Alabama struggles to score this weekend, and some will say, well, same old, same old. No, that's not what this weekend's about. This weekend, I mean, the Minnesota Twins would have a difficult time scoring this weekend against Pickens and Gotzel at Tennessee. They may be the two best pitchers in all of college softball on one team. So I think Alabama can win this weekend. I do think it's possible. I just think the path to winning, guys, is Beaver and Brisky have to be phenomenal, and they often are. That wouldn't be a surprise, but they'll have to be phenomenal. And Alabama's going to have to find a way to score 2 or 3 runs and win 2-1, 3-2. I think that's the path. It's not going to be two teams trading bombs. That's not what's going to happen. It might be one team, might be Tennessee, who hit. I think they have like 6 girls who've hit 10 home runs, and Alabama's got 1 girl that's hit 6. So Tennessee also hits home runs. I saw them play in person twice in Tuscaloosa. I walked out of Rhodes both times, telling people around me that Tennessee looked like a national champion to me. I mean, that's how good they are. So it's an uphill battle for sure. Alabama an underdog for sure, but there is a path here, and it's winning low-scoring games.
Yeah, Jimmy, and when you don't hit the ball or score runs enough, it doesn't just put pressure on those pitchers. It puts it on the defense too. I mean, you have no margin for error defensively. So you've got to be pretty much lights out this weekend from that standpoint too. When the ball is put in play, you have got to make the plays. Tennessee isn't going to need a lot of help.
Don't give them any help.
Walks too.
Can't walk them.
Yeah.
Any unearned run. By the way, Alabama gave up a ton of unearned runs this season. That's not what you normally see out of Patrick Murphy's bunch, but they gave up a ton of unearned runs. You can't give up a single unearned run. You can't give up runs on walks and wild pitches. And you've got to find a way to score. I think I like the idea of this weekend myself. I don't think Patrick Murphy's going to ask me for advice here, but I would go back to a little bit of small ball. I think bunting, running, playing the girls like Larissa Pruitt, Kristen White, just the do anything to get on base and then run, be aggressive on the base paths. Just find a way to manufacture runs. If you're just sitting back waiting for a 3-run homer, you might as well sit back and wait on next season.
Yeah, this team isn't built that way. Anyway, you said it. When it comes to extra base potential, home run potential in this series, it doesn't look to favor Alabama in any form or fashion. And absolutely put the pressure on Tennessee defensively. Make them make plays. And that would seem sensible for sure heading into this weekend. Hey, Charlie, as we just talked about, you were very, very busy here in the last couple of days. We got Yay Alabama stuff going on. We got the Knicks kids golf tournament going on. Some opportunities with Kalen DeBoer and Nate Oates to get some thoughts from them on their respective offseason. So I'm going to start with you. Give me your biggest Kalen DeBoer takeaway from his media opportunity this week, and then also with Nate Oates.
Yeah, it was crazy because you guys are talking about baseball, being over there in Birmingham on Tuesday for a couple of events, and one of them wasn't at the Hoover Met. It was kind of wild. But with the coaches, Kalen DeBoer, we've talked to him a lot. There's not like a lot of new to get to, but he hasn't really talked a lot about the transfers Alabama's been able to add in the spring portal window, and just asked about that group overall and bringing in a guy like Caden Proctor, which adding him to the list kind of feels a little funny because he has only gone for a couple of 3 months. But no, he kind of laid it out pretty flatly that he was a guy that was going to play a significant role in the program before he entered the transfer portal. Obviously, he started every game as a true freshman this past year, but for an incoming head coach to immediately recognize that, and see the path to him maybe taking that next step in year 2 to get him back is huge. And Kalen DeBoer called it a big deal. And he said he's happy with the additions they made. You've got 6 transfers coming in, 2 on the offensive line, 3 in the defensive backfield. You've got the kicker and Graham Nicholson coming over. So they feel really good about what they were able to add, because those are areas that they kind of highlighted specifically, coming out of spring ball. And then for Nate, man, that's the first time we've talked to him since Phoenix. And, it's crazy that that's not even been 2 months ago. It feels like the Final Four was, 3-4 months ago. But, there's a lot to cover with him. I feel like we could have gone on for another, 5-10 minutes, and we all know Nate likes to talk. But the biggest news, obviously, is what he had to say about Mark Sears. That's what everybody's waiting on. And it sounds like, the wait's going to continue. The deadline to withdraw is next Wednesday, May 29th. And it sounds like Mark has a workout with the Milwaukee Bucks on that day. So I don't think he's going to announce any kind of decision before that. And it's all going to depend on the feedback he gets. And Nate kind of called it a win-win situation, where either you get Mark Sears back, which is obviously huge and would be huge for Alabama, or he gets the feedback he wants. He gets a guaranteed contract, and he ultimately cashes in on the dream that he's had since he's a little kid. And then you can use that as a recruiting tool. As we took a kid from Ohio, a transfer. He spent 2 years in our system, and then he was an NBA draft pick. Nate Oates always thinking about the recruiting side of things, but they feel like they're in a great spot. Nate mentioned a couple of times, actually I think 3 separate times, how he mentioned national championship. And so if there weren't already high expectations for Alabama, the head coach himself is putting those out there. And I think that there should be a lot to be excited for this team.
Yeah, Nate's not from the Nick Saban school of not talking about national championships.
No, he's not.
5 months before the season even starts. Hey, I love it. And I think it's what Alabama fans are already thinking, and they love to hear more of that. Jimmy, obviously Mark Sears on the basketball front. That's where the watch, the countdown is kind of on right now. What about some other comments maybe from Nate? I thought Chris Youngblood,
Right.
He was pretty strong on the South Florida transfer, and I think he made some good points as to why more folks probably should be.
He did. He talked about how the lineup could be really big if you put Chris Youngblood at the 2, and how big that can make you. Talked about how he was his conference's player of the year, or a co-conference player of the year, which is a big deal. That's a pretty good league, by the way, and that's not the bottom of the rung group of 5,
even without Houston, it's still a damn good league, right?
Yeah, it really is. It's not just one of your bottom rung. I don't know what you call them in basketball. I guess it'd be like the group of 15 or something, but it's not one of the worst basketball leagues by any means. He mentioned every new player, when in his comments. So that's exciting. He talked about a national championship, like you said. Nick Saban would be talking about the process. Oates has talked about raising the trophy. And I like it because Nate backs it up. Nate's confidence when he says things like that would be off-putting if he didn't always back it up. Alabama's going to be good. He'll tell you Alabama's going to be good, and I think it's great as long as he's backing up. It wouldn't be great at all if Alabama goes, 3-15, in the league next year and doesn't even make it the NIT. Then Nate's comments will come back to haunt him, but they never have because he's always backed it up, and I think he will again. But going over each individual player, he also raved about Aiden Holloway, which I found very interesting because Aiden Holloway didn't really have the type of production one would lead you to believe that he's going to be really good in year 2. But Nate obviously likes the traits and the system fit, and it'll be interesting to see how many minutes Aiden plays, assuming Sears returns.
Yeah, that's the X factor. That's the sort of cohesion factor here with Mark Sears and his upcoming decision. What about it, Jimmy, in terms of Kalen DeBoer? Charlie kind of talked about this in relation to Alabama in the transfer portal this offseason. And when you think about it, they really made big plays in all 3 phases when you include Nicholson in that with the kicking game.
Yeah, DeBoer obviously is pleased with what he's done in the transfer portal. And I'm sure that also includes the winter portal as well. One thing that's different about this portal haul for Alabama compared to the previous seasons is, last year Saban was bringing in guys that were immediate impact starters, whether you're talking about Key, Jalen Key, Trey Amos, obviously other guys, even going back to a Henry To'o. I think this particular portal group is interesting because there are the immediate impact guys like Caden Proctor, is obviously going to be the starting left tackle, Graham Nicholson, who will once again be one of the best kickers in the country. But as part of this portal class, there's also guys that you might not see a ton of this season that could be hugely impactful next year. I would look to the safety from Penn State, King Mack. He could easily be a starter in 2025. I'm not sure how much we'll see him this year. LT Overton was a guy who ended the spring as a number 2 guy at the Bandit spot, but he could be a significant player this year and an even more significant player in 2025. Cam Howard, I think from Charlotte's a guy we don't talk about enough. He's another guy that I think might be more significant in 2025 than he will be this year, assuming good health for the starters. So it's not only a portal class that's going to impact this season, but also seasons to come. And we hadn't really seen that in the past. Most of the portal guys Alabama's picked up the past 3-4 years have been guys that were just the immediate impact types.
Yeah, maybe even Naquil Bertrand down the road at that offensive tackle position. It's a good point, Jimmy, that we always equate portal with plug and play, it seems like. But with this group, you're right. Really, just about all these guys have multiple years of eligibility, too. That's what you like about this bigger class of transfer portal options. Let's stick with football, guys, and let's get into some wide receiver over-unders because, as we know, it is, instead of Shark Week, it's wide receiver week at BamaOnLine.com. Thanks to Charlie Potter. He's got you covered right there with us. Charlie, you've also got some stuff as it relates to the wide receivers and the quarterback position. Some guys getting some work on their own. Tampa, once again, it seems like the Tampa Tide. I mean, that's kind of the spring summer team, it sounds like, for Alabama football these days from what you've been able to gather and present to us there at Bama Online.
Yeah, they spent last week down at a House of Athlete with Yo Murphy, who's a great trainer. And this is something Jalen Milroe kind of did last year, gathered up all his receivers, a couple of linemen, and went down there. This year, the receiver number is a little lower. The only guys that were able to make it this week or last week was Emmanuel Henderson and Jaren Hamilton. You could throw CJ Dupree, the tight end, in that mix. But guys like Kendrick Law and some others had some scheduling conflict. And it was the week after Mother's Day. That's kind of tough on some guys. But no, I think the big reveal is that joining Jalen was Ty Simpson. And, they were able to both work with the receivers. Not Monday, but I think Tuesday through Friday, Devontae Smith was also down there. He spends a lot of time down in Tampa with his offseason work. And I think that's big for the wide receivers, is to be able to work with Devontae and learn from him because, they're kind of same build, both Hamilton and Henderson. And I think they can learn from not only just the way that he moves and plays, but the way that he goes about his business, because Smitty's a pro. And, I think it was a good week. They were able to also 3 days down there, get some work in with John Gruden, kind of that QB room or whatever they used to call it, that he did for ESPN, and get some work on the board. They did on-field stuff, obviously worked out in the weight room, and then afterwards got on the field and went through their own playbook. So I think it was a productive week. And, I think that those guys, and plus running backs Justice Haynes and Richard Young, were able to get some good work in. I think more guys are going to head down this week, if not later, before summer workouts start.
Yeah, good stuff here in the off season to just whet your appetite just enough. And of course, Charlie keeping us informed right there at BamaOnline.com. So let's get into some of these over-unders that I've got for you guys. And Jimmy, we'll start with you with Germie Bernard. And these are 12-game over-unders. We're not talking about the potential for 13, 14, 15 games, just 12-game regular season totals that we're looking at here, Jimmy. And we'll start with Germie Bernard. And I set that number for catches for the Washington transfer at 54.5. You going to go over? You going to go under that for Germie Bernard?
That's a big number, but I'm still going to go over. I just feel one of my predictions, bold or not, for the season is I think Germie Bernard is going to be a major part of the offense. I think he's going to be wide receiver one. I think he's going to have a season that some will compare to Jamison Williams, because I think that they came in under similar circumstances where both were the number 4 receiver from where they came from, but the 3 guys ahead of them were all ready for the NFL guys. And it's understandable as to why they were behind, who they were behind. But now they're a year older, coming into a situation where he's wide receiver one. I'm going over. I think he has a monster season.
Yeah, Charlie, we talked about this too. Don't fall into the trap of necessarily just going to Washington's numbers last year and looking at Rome Odunze and saying, well, Rome caught 92 balls last year.
Right.
Jalen Polk caught 69 passes last year. This is an automatic, different offense. Not exactly Michael Penix Jr. working from the pocket in this offense. Strengths in general, perhaps, for this offense at Alabama compared to what Kalen DeBoer had in Seattle a year ago. Got to be careful with some of that. I mean, Michael Penix Jr. attempted 555 passes last year. That's 15 games, but still, I think Jalen Milroe was around 290 in 13 games. That's like 100% markup just on pass attempts. So where do you go with all that in mind with Germie Bernard in the 54.5?
I'm kind of in the same mindset as Jimmy in that I think that Germie has a chance to be your number 1 wide receiver. The parallels to Jamison Williams are there. Obviously, they kind of have a little bit different skill set because Jamo is just a speed demon out on the outside. But I do think that, Germie has a chance to be wide receiver 1. I do look at, like you were saying, though, what kind of offense he's coming into just in terms of returning personnel. And you look at last year with Jalen Milroe at quarterback, your number 1 receiver had 48 receptions. That was Isaiah Bond. So that goes into account for me a little bit. But I do think even though that Kalen DeBoer has been effusive in his praise of the running back position, I do think they're still going to want to throw the ball around. I think that they have a lot of receivers, kind of a lot of mouths to feed, because you look at Bernard, Kendrick Law, Kobe Prentice. You add in some of those young guys like Ryan Williams, who we think is going to have a big impact in year 1, Caleb Odom, Emmanuel Henderson, Cole Adams. That's a lot of mouths to feed. But I do think, I think he could get to 60 catches. I feel like that's a realistic number for Germie Bernard in a regular season. If you said the full gamut, like if Alabama's going to potentially make the college football playoff, I would feel very comfortable with that number. But I think 60 feels right for a regular season because I think he's going to step into that number 1 wide receiver role and have a big impact in year 1.
Yeah, my public school math upbringing, 60 catches, 12 regular, that's 5 a game. It's
Right.
not all that difficult to envision Germie Bernard in this offense catching on average 5 passes a game. And I think your point about the depth of this rotation is a good one too. I will say that if Jalen Hale were healthy, I would be more tempted to go under because he's a true outside guy. Man, you brought up Devontae Smith and working with those Alabama receivers. That's a guy that I think, still could perhaps have that kind of potential down the road. It's unfortunate with the injury, but yeah, I think I got to go over the 54.5 for Germie as well. What about total offensive touches for Kendrick Law, Jimmy, in 2024? I also like the 54.5 receptions for Bernard. I set total offensive touches for Law at 54.5. Now, that doesn't include, I said offensive, doesn't include the potential for the return game there. So what do you think about that number for Kendrick Law in 2024?
Yeah, I noticed how you use touches, and I do think they're going to use him on those jet sweeps. It's the most, I think they're going to do it a lot. I think they'll run it a lot, and I think him and Bernard will be the most obvious candidates to be the ball carrier on the wide receiver sweeps. I'm still going to go under here. I think Kendrick Law is one of the most interesting players on offense. I think he could potentially be a major player in the offense, but with Kendrick Law so far, guys, I know it's been a young player, a freshman and a sophomore, and only now is he an upperclassman. There's been there's size, there's speed, there's talent, but what there hasn't been is production. And I'm a little bit Missouri on Kendrick Law. I need him to show me. I mean, I know you can show me your size. I know you can show me what it says on the clock and your 40. I know you can show me your leadership, because I understand he's a real leader in that room. But what I haven't seen is production. And I think he can be that guy. But because I've not seen it yet, I'm going to go under.
What about you, Charlie, with the 54.5 offensive touches for Kendrick Law?
Yeah, if you hadn't put offensive in there, I feel like it's a slam dunk, because I think he can be a really dangerous threat as a kickoff returner. But you look at it, I don't think he had a single carry last year, just in terms of a rushing statistic. When I was looking at CFB stats before the show to do my quick brush up, but I think the opportunities are there, like Jimmy was highlighting. For me, I do think Kendrick is going to take a huge step. And you look at it, this isn't an indication at all of production preview, but when they've been doing things, whether it's the Alabama events or whatever, Kendrick Law's been in a lot of this stuff. And I think he's a guy that a lot of guys talk about as possibly one of the fastest guys on the team. That's why he's back there as a kickoff returner. So I think that this coaching staff sees that Swiss Army knife ability and are going to get him involved in a lot of ways. But again, it goes back to kind of just a ton of mouths to feed, because I think a lot of different guys could be involved on those jet sweep motions. I think Emmanuel Henderson makes sense there. I think a guy like Cole Adams could be there. So for me, I would go under, just because I don't know how many just rushing carries he's going to get this season. And you look at, is he going to have the same impact receiving wise as a Germie Bernard? I think he could be close. I think Kendrick Law is set for a big year, but like Jimmy said, just the past production hasn't been there. But I do think that, again, the way they've kind of been, putting Kendrick Law out front, whether it's at Coleman Coliseum, signing autographs or whatever, he's a guy I think that they like a lot and that we're going to see a lot more.
Yeah, it could come down to touch efficiency, yards per touch for Kendrick Law, with his big play ability, maybe more so than even quantity. And it could come down to whether or not the jet sweep in this offense is handed off and it becomes a rushing attempt.
That's true.
Or if it's tossed that just little bit that constitutes, right, a reception. Because, Germie Bernard last year at Washington had 13 rushing attempts, which tells me they'll hand the ball to these receivers on those type of plays. So it could just come down to that. Be careful is what I'm saying. If you somehow find a prop bet for Kendrick Law offensive touches, you need to take all of this into account. We look out for the degenerates out there too. Never say we don't. But, Bernard last year at Washington and there I go, doing what I said not to do, going back to Washington last year. Bernard had 34 receptions, 13 rushing attempts. That got him up to 47 offensive touches. I see something like that for Kendrick Law, but I'm kind of like Jimmy too. Until I see it, I'm probably going to go just under the 54.5. Let's talk about Kobe Prentice, Jimmy. Yards per catch. Just kind of touched on that with yards per touch potential for Kendrick Law and Germie Bernard. It looks like Kobe's in line to really step it up with Isaiah Bond moving along to the University of Texas. And a year ago, Isaiah Bond averaged 13.9 yards per reception, also led the Crimson Tide in receptions, as Charlie pointed out. So I'm going to set the number there for Kobe. His first season a couple of years ago had 30-plus catches. Yards per catch was only around 11. Last year, about 18 catches, but the yards per catch went up to over 17. What do you think for Kobe in terms of 13.9 yards per catch?
I'm going to go over here for Kobe Prentice. I can see him less catches overall than Germie Bernard, but maybe nearly as much yardage. I see Kobe sort of being a major deep threat guy from the slot position. He's been a volume receiver at Alabama. I think there's some rapport between Milroe and Kobe because they've been with each other now heading into a year 3, and Kobe's been on the field, a lot. I like Kobe as maybe the primary deep threat on the team. We know Milroe's got a nice deep ball. That's going to be something Nick Sheridan and Kalen DeBoer want to take advantage of. So I see Kobe Prentice catching quite a few balls, but I see him being sort of the home run guy. I'll go over here.
What about you, Charlie? Where are you going with that one?
I kind of feel the same because, like you mentioned last year, he only caught 18 passes, but averaging damn near 17.5 per grab. That's nice. And it's an indication of how he was used. I think it'll be similar, even though you don't really know fully what to expect with a new coaching staff and a new offensive philosophy coming in. But I think him working out of the slot, I can see a lot of deep posts, running the seam route. Also, Kobe's a guy that with his speed, you take a quick slant and, it's kind of like the Jerry Jeudy, Devontae Smith, Henry Ruggs days, Jalen Waddle. Like Tua puts on the spot and they're gone. Kobe Prentice has the ability to do a lot of that. A lot of these guys do, if we're being honest. But it's just the way that he was able to kind of get his last year. If he can continue to do that, I feel like it's a slam dunk to be, right there about 15 yards per catch. So I'd go over.
Yeah, there's some slot guys, it's more about short space quickness and reliability on 3rd and 6, going across the middle, moving chains. Kobe can do that, but yeah, he's a legit 4.4 dude, if not sub 4.4. So I'm with you guys on the over there at 13.9. Now the one everyone is waited on. Jimmy, games played before Ryan Williams catches his first touchdown pass for the Alabama Crimson Tide. Is he going to just go ahead and take care of it in that season opener? Maybe it's South Florida. Maybe it's Wisconsin. Does it maybe come after that first bye week? I set that number at 2.5 games before Ryan Williams to catch his first touchdown pass. You going over the 2.5 or under?
I am going under and cheating a little bit and really, really diving into this. I think Alabama's going to score quite a few points in those first 2 games against Western Kentucky and South Florida. I think we are going to see the second offense play more snaps in those 2 games, perhaps more than any other until you get to Mercer late. So with the second team offense and Ty Simpson in wanting to make a splash, he's going to throw it to his playmaker, who's going to be Ryan Williams, with that second group early. So I'm going Ty Simpson to Ryan Williams for a touchdown in week 1. More about Ty than Ryan, whereas I think Ty's going to want to make plays coming off the bench this year. So I got Ty to Ryan for touchdowns early this season. Then we might not see it again for a while. But Charlie, I like it early.
You like it early too, Charlie?
I get what Jimmy's saying. Like, I believe I can see that happening. It makes too much sense. But I went back and looked at just some freshman receivers, and my mind immediately went to Amari Cooper. I was like, when did Amari Cooper score his first touchdown his freshman year? Now, granted, it's not apples to apples. I fully understand that. But it was week 3. So that's over in your mark there. And I could see it happening week 1, week 2, week 3 easily, but just with that in mind, so we're not all chalk here, I'll go over. I'll be the antagonist of the room. I do think Ryan Williams, though, I'm fascinated to see what he looks like in fall camp, where he's running, just what he looks like compared to the other players, because he is a guy that should be going into his senior year in high school. So that's going to be fascinating when we're able to get out there for preseason camp. But for me right now, just given what Amari Cooper was able to do as a true freshman, some of these other guys that had to kind of wait a little bit, I'll go over.
Yeah, I was thinking about quarterback sustainability where this one is concerned too. In other words, even if during the course of the season, Alabama is forced to turn to Ty Simpson, I think you could keep a lot of these totals and feel like they sustain. They're not quarterback dependent as much because of the quality I think Alabama has at the quarterback position. And I agree with Jimmy. Also, I mean, this is an offense that's still going to need its reps in those first couple of games of the season, right? I mean, so you're not just going to put Ty Simpson in there and hand the ball off. You're not going to try to embarrass people either, but you're probably going to be more inclined to continue to run your offense, even if games get a little bit out of hand in Alabama's favor. So I'm going to go under the 2.5. I like Charlie's thinking, though. We talked about Amari Cooper here in the past. It didn't just, in relation to Ryan Williams, perhaps, it didn't just, turn right on for Amari in 2012. He wasn't, a 150 yard per game guy from the outset. It took a little bit, and we'll see if that's the case with Ryan Williams. Cole Adams, guys, he impressed some folks in the spring, impressed some folks in the A-Day game. And so what I'm going to ask you, Jimmy, to start us off with, 7.5 catches for Cole Adams through the first 4 games of the 2024 season, do you think he'll be positioned in a way in the rotation to be able to do that? Or perhaps going back to your point about games in which Alabama gets a pretty good lead and he's able to get in there and maybe rack up some catches from that standpoint?
With Cole Adams, it could definitely happen. I like Cole a lot. I think he's going to be a significant player at Alabama, but that number is a little bit too high for me for those, even in those early games where I do think we'll see more wide receivers than we will say against later in the year when you're at LSU and at Tennessee and at Oklahoma. I don't know how many wide receivers play in that game, but I do think a lot of wide receivers will get reps against Western Kentucky and South Florida, maybe even on the road at Wisconsin early. But I'll go under there. I don't think Cole will be impactful quickly. I think he's going to be primarily with the twos and will become a one later in the season or later in his career. I'm going to go under, but I don't want people to think that's because I'm not high on Cole Adams. I think Cole's going to be a significant player at Alabama in his time.
Yeah. What about you, Charlie, with this one? 7.5 catches for Cole Adams through the first 4 games of the season.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Jimmy said, and kind of what you were talking about earlier when we were talking about Kobe Prentice. Travis is a slight guy that can kind of take those quick passes or just shallow stuff over the middle. That feels like that's his role that he could take on. But I think for me, like just trying to envision what some of these guys could produce, I think for me right now, it feels like the ceiling for Cole Adams maybe 15, 20 catches, and then kind of breaking that down in a segment or a third of the season. 7.5 through the first 4. I don't think he gets to that if that's the total. So I think he's going to have an impact. I think he's a guy that could also be someone we see on special teams. I like what I've seen from Cole Adams. I think the coaching staff feels the same way. But right now, just again, with so many mouths to feed, it's tough to envision that number being higher.
Yeah, you say the first 4 games, and that sounds like a lot of opportunities, but in reality, Wisconsin on the road, Georgia and Tuscaloosa are 2 of those games. So
Yeah.
we're probably talking more about 7.5 and 2.5 games. So with that in mind, I'll go a little bit under. Maybe if I had posed it as touches because of what Cole Adams might get to do in that part of things on those Jets and those type of scenarios, it could be close. But yeah, seems to be in a very promising position to do some good things in the future. And he'll be a guy that you certainly want to keep an eye on. What about catches for another true freshman? Obviously, a lot of talk about Ryan Williams, but Caleb Odom, as we know, going from tight end to wide receiver, at least in the spring, I guess the expectation continues to be that's where he will be when fall camp gets underway in August. And with that, boy, I put it at a big number.
Mm-hmm.
Probably too big, but hey, I went 34.5 because in part I'm thinking Jalen Hale's out. There's going to be some opportunities on the outside, but you got Ryan Williams coming in. Jimmy, what are your thoughts on that number for Caleb Odom?
I think you make a great point, Travis, about Jalen Hale being out and maybe Caleb Odom being sort of the Jalen Hale replacement, because Jalen Hale is going to miss the majority, if not all, of the season, and Caleb Odom is going to be in his spot at wide receiver at least some of the time. So I like that, but I am going to go under that. That number is a little big for me. Like we've talked about all throughout the show, guys. I think wide receiver, the wealth is going to be spread out. I think Germie Bernard's going to catch a lot of balls. I think Kobe Prentice is going to catch almost as many. And then from then on out, it's going to be heavily spread out. You got Ryan Williams. You got Kendrick Law. You got E-Man. I think Emmanuel Henderson's going to play and catch some balls. Even Jaren Hamilton, a guy we never talk about. But, hey, who's the guy? He was playing with the ones, in the spring. So we're not even, next weekend, I assume, as tight end week is coming up. And Josh Cuevas, I think, is a guy that's going to catch some balls. And they're going to throw it to the back. So I got under on Caleb Odom. Again, not a statement about Caleb. He's going to be a great player. But I think he's just going to be a victim to spreading the wealth.
Yeah, I think that's an under there. I got a little adventurous. I was just kind of throwing some chum out there. See if there were any sharks, might come up and really attack that 34.5 and go over. You guys sniffed that one out pretty easily. Hey, Jimmy kind of talked about it. Some of the other guys in this rotation that aren't being talked about a lot. So we'll cap it with this when it comes to the wide receiver over-unders. here on the YouTube home for BamaOnLine.com. Combined touchdowns, just touchdowns, offensive touchdowns for Bubba Hampton, Jaren Hamilton, and Emmanuel Henderson in 2024. I set that combined touchdown total, Jimmy, and we'll start with you at 3.5. Which way are you going with that one?
Yeah, under. Again, spreading the wealth. I'm not sure. Bubba Hampton, I think, he's a guy on my roster ranking countdown. I'm going to get to the next day or so. I'm not sure how much he's going to play. To me, I'm really on the border of whether he's going to redshirt or not. I think he's a maybe he plays, maybe he doesn't guy. Jaren Hamilton, like I said, I think we don't talk about him enough. But I'm going to go under with the touchdowns. Touchdown passes to me, I think you're going to see a lot of Germie and a lot of Kobe and the tight ends, but I don't see a lot of touchdown receptions for the guys on what I would call the lower end of the first rotation.
All right, Charlie. Over, under 3.5 combined touchdowns for that trio.
I went over. I feel like Emmanuel Henderson's due for some production. I think that he was injured to begin last year. He's a guy that I think the coaching staff feels good about. And then, like we talked about earlier, both he and Jaren Hamilton were in Tampa with Jalen and Ty this week. They're getting that rapport. They're building that up. So I do think that I think 4 or 5 for that group feels realistic. I'm with Jimmy, though, on Bubba Hampton. I don't know what kind of role he plays. But, as Nick Saban said before he retired, Bubba's a dog. I don't ever roll those guys out. So late in game situations, he gets an opportunity. I can see Bubba, getting one. And then those other guys, I think, 4 or 5 seems realistic. So I'll go over there.
Yeah, to me, there's that sort of great wall separating 3 and 4 in this one. Like, I can see one of these guys like Emmanuel Henderson with a couple of touchdowns. I can see one of the other two with one. But then when you start thinking about getting over that 3.5 to 4, that's where I have a little bit of a problem. Maybe special teams comes into that. Maybe Emmanuel Henderson, gets a look on kickoffs or something in a 48-6 game and takes one to the house. I mean, we've seen that in the past in some of these kind of games. The kind of games that makes it hard to predict too. You get into November and you're playing that FCS opponent, and somebody who hadn't played all year goes for, 3 catches for 98 and 2 touchdowns. The potential for that stuff makes this kind of fun, but also a little bit difficult at times as well. By the way, there it is, position week. Wow, look at that video.
Yeah, beautiful
on that page there. Speak of the devil, look at those guys. Wow, there they are. And Charlie's got it covered for you there. There you see top contenders at the wide receiver position, dark horse candidates, Cinderella stories, and he's got more position week articles. We'll have our big predictions coming up for the wide receiver position here in the next couple of days. Charlie got you covered with that great stuff, and us at BamaOnLine.com. And of course, if you haven't subscribed to this here YouTube channel, we would appreciate you doing that as well. Hit that subscribe button, turn on those notifications. If you don't mind, give us a like while you're at it. We greatly appreciate that as well. All right, guys, let's get into some opponent stuff here in the offseason. And I thought a good place to start that was with the head coaches that Alabama's going to face during the 2024 season. Wanted your top 3 opposing head coaches from that perspective. And I thought about going 3-1, but really the intrigue is at 3, right?
Right.
Because we're all on the same ground here as far as Kirby Smart in that top spot. Even though Kirby 1-5 against Alabama. Do I have that correct, Jimmy?
I don't know specifically, but that sounds exactly right. I would have guessed off the top of my head, maybe even 1-6, but no, 1-5 sounds
yeah,
more.
Might be.
He's not exactly didn't exactly light up the old boss.
No, he was. He might have sent the best retirement gift to Nick Saban. And it sounds like Georgia. It sounds like Kirby got a Nick Saban retirement bonus, right? Because they bumped him up to like $13 million. And I think part of that was Saban's gone. Let's go ahead and make sure this guy, gets what he needs here. What about the 2 spot though, Charlie? Is it as simple as Brian Kelly for you there, or you got another guy in mind there, perhaps?
No, I think Brian Kelly makes a lot of sense. Maybe if Texas was on the schedule, you'd give Sark a look, but they're not. And but Brian Kelly, he's played for a national championship. He's produced Heisman winners. I think you look at kind of longevity with this. I know a lot of different outlets do a lot of different breakdowns this time of year of coaching rankings, but I think CBS, when I was looking at it, they had him at number 4, and that's behind Kirby, Ryan Day, and Dabo, and just ahead of Sark. So I think it feels like when you look at the grand scheme of things for Alabama and just who they're going to play this year, it makes a lot of sense to put Brian Kelly number 2.
What about you, Jimmy? Is it, Brian Kelly getting that win over Alabama a couple of years ago too? Because if he doesn't get that win, I mean, Hugh Freeze has a couple wins over Nick Saban. Josh Heupel has a win over Nick Saban. Luke Fickell is a college football playoff coach. Whatever you thought of Cincinnati a couple of 3 years ago, Alabama saw the Bearcats in Jerry World. So is it that clear for you too with Brian Kelly in the 2 spot?
Yeah, I'm big in terms of I want a resume. In 2 teams in the college football playoff, the Heisman winner, like Charlie said, total wins in his career is a mega number. To me, Brian Kelly has easily earned right now the number 2 spot in terms of best coaches, that Alabama's going to face just based on accomplishment. It's Brian Kelly. Now, I get that some people will say, hey, I prefer this guy or I prefer that guy, but those guys won't have the accomplishments that Brian Kelly has. So to me, Brian Kelly was an easy choice for second best coach Alabama faces this season.
Charlie talked about it. There's no Sark on the regular season schedule. There's no Lane. If this was a year ago, there's no Jimbo. You got, you don't see A&M anyway this year. But what about that 3 spot? And yeah, Brian Kelly, he coached a team to the BCS national championship game all those years ago, got blown out by Alabama down in South Florida. Brian Kelly too, he's kind of like Kalen DeBoer. This is a guy who's won at every level that he's been at, whether it was the lower level, the FBS, a group of 5, and now at the elite level, he's done it. Whatever you think of the guy and however he pronounces family. Number 3, guys. So we get into that tier, right? Luke Fickell, Hugh, Heupel, Elijah Drinkwitz coming off a hell of a year, Jimmy.
Yeah, I consider Drink. I went with Luke Fickell.
Wow.
And just being the fact, again, accomplishment. He took a group of 5, the only group of 5 team to make it to the college football playoff. Of course, losing to Alabama in Dallas. But I think coaching Cincinnati to the college football playoff and becoming a hot name. I think what happened last year at Wisconsin in year 1 for him sort of dimmed his star just a little bit, but probably expectations were too high for a year 1 in a big league like the Big Ten. So I'm going with Luke Fickell just barely over Eli Drinkowitz for that 3rd spot for me. But I certainly understand you could get some wide variance as to the 3rd best coach Alabama faces this season. But Fickell's my answer.
What about it, Charlie? Who you got in the 3 hole?
Yeah, I feel like Jimmy's cheating off my test over here.
Oh, wow.
Because, like you said, just kind of what he's done over his career. I also kind of took into account, where Alabama is going to be playing these games. Going on the road to Wisconsin, that's the first true road game of the Kalen DeBoer era. That's going to be tough. Now, I think Missouri has a better roster than Wisconsin. I think it's going to be a tougher opponent. But I do think that when you look at what Luke Fickell has done, like you said, with his job at Cincinnati, it's tough not to go there. I thought really hard about Drink. I think he's done a great job at Missouri. What they did last year was really impressive. Josh Heupel, that went over Alabama a couple of years ago, that's huge. And then Hugh Freeze, what he was able to do at Ole Miss. But that's kind of the next pool. But you just look at the accomplishments. Luke Fickell makes a lot of sense. And that trip to Wisconsin is going to be really interesting, given that it's the first true road game.
I'm probably going to get canceled for this, but I'm going Hugh still in the 3 spot because when it goes to accomplishments, for me, it's how many times did you beat the man? And he beat him twice. And, obviously 14 and 15. Yeah, his cell phone behavior, some of those things left a lot to be desired, obviously. Went to Liberty, won big there. And here he is right back at the elite Power 5 level. I guess it would be easier to pick Hugh if Auburn even
wasn't so bad.
finished last season. And yeah, I mean, there was the heartbreaker to Alabama, obviously, but the bowl performance was atrocious
That was terrible.
from a team that needed a good one. You can just say, well, it's a bowl game. It doesn't matter. Well, you know what? That Independence Bowl at the end of Nick Saban's first season, it seemed to have some carryover, didn't it? Getting that win to cap that season against Colorado, and then springboard into 2008 and everything that seemed to come after that. So I have a little bit of trepidation with Hugh for a variety of reasons. But I'll go Hugh there, and I'll get summarily canceled, I'm sure. Hey guys, I've held you captive here far too long. You can blink twice if you'd like help. Go ahead and do that at this point. No, in all seriousness, always a lot of fun with you two here. Always very informative. Always great stuff from these guys with us at BamaOnLine.com. Go to the roundtable. Charlie's got some super offseason stuff as it relates to the Alabama offense and the Alabama football team, as he has talked about here on the program. Basketball with Nate. It's never probably going to take a break. Recruiting, you got a big month of official visits upon us on that front for Kalen DeBoer and his staff. So we got wall-to-wall coverage. Again, this used to be a sleepy time of year. Remember that, guys?
Yeah.
Remember when the SEC spring meetings were coming up, Charlie, and we were trying to figure out what we could squeeze out of all this stuff, right? You remember that.
Yeah, it was definitely a quiet time. And now with basketball too, man, like we've got a little teaser here. We got an interesting basketball feature coming to the site tomorrow morning. So this week it's usually very quiet. It hasn't been though.
Teasing Charlie Potter. That's going to be his new nickname after that. I look forward to that. Absolutely. Jimmy, obviously, still some baseball stuff to consider as well. Big weekend for softball. I know you literally keep us posted right there at BamaOnLine.com. And again, if you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, we hope you'll do that right now. Hit that subscribe button, hit a like for us, turn on those notifications. You'll get all this stuff as it drops on the YouTube home for BOL. Thanks again, guys. Have a great weekend. We'll do it again next week.
See you guys
Sounds
later.
good.
For Charlie Potter and Jimmy Stein, Travis Reier, thanking you once again for joining us. And until next time, so long, everybody.